أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Brothers, sisters, respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome once again to our series, Life, the Islamic Answer, in which we are trying to extract and understand the principles of living Islamically in a complex world from the original sources of our religion, from the Holy Quran and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. We have gone through a number of important headings in the series in this first theme, which is knowledge and reason in Islam. And we had decided to start discussing the heading of the community of knowledge. We said that after understanding the importance of knowledge and reason in Islam in general, and the undesirability of jahl, the only other alternative to knowledge and reason in Islam being ignorance and foolishness, we were left with the only option, which is therefore to start a journey towards what Islam considers to be knowledge and reason. And we said before going any further, there are two conditions that have to be met for knowledge to be considered Islamic knowledge. And those are that it is acquired and used based on sincerity, with sincere intentions, and that it leads to action. Once we understood those, then we came back to asking the question, then now what? And now what is answered simply by, therefore we must start our journey towards seeking knowledge, acquiring knowledge, and using knowledge. And this led us to start discussing what it means to become a learner in Islam. And then once we acquire a certain amount of knowledge, we become a teacher of knowledge, or a scholar, or to use the Arabic term, which is more accurate and with a slightly different nuance, someone who carries knowledge. So not necessarily the scholar as we understand it, not necessarily the teacher. These become some of the functions of the person who carries the knowledge. Al-alim is the person, literally in Arabic it means the person who has acquired knowledge. And so now what? The now what is, you must now share this knowledge with others. And you can do it in a formal way, where you do become a teacher, an official source of the knowledge and information for others, or you can do it in your own way, indirectly, and however you see fit, and based on your own circumstances and conditions and abilities. So this gave us the learner in Islam, and then what it means to be a alim, a teacher, a scholar, a source of knowledge for others in Islam. But then if we have the learner and the teacher, we are headed towards more than just the individual. It's more than just myself. I'm now starting to be in a relationship with others around knowledge in Islam. And therefore, we started the discussion on building a community of knowledge. And after we understood what it means and the importance that our religion gives to this notion of being part of a greater group of people, like-minded people who share our values and our beliefs in Islam, and the importance of it, and that this is a reality, that in Islam we are not just separate, isolated individuals. We are individuals, and we are also members of a larger community. And so we have individual responsibilities and accountabilities and duties as much as we have collective, communal, social responsibilities and duties, and so on and so forth. And so we began to discuss this notion of the community of knowledge. What does it mean? Its importance, and so on and so forth. And part of this discussion was to look at who makes up this community. And so, of course, we already covered the learner and we covered the teacher. Those two must definitely be staples in that community. But who else? And in short, our religion says everyone else has to be part of that community. Everyone has to find a role for themselves in that community. At least to attend, at least to help create gatherings of knowledge, or to support, or at least, and as we find in other narrations, the weakest form of faith, at least to be a lover of those types of gatherings around knowledge. And this is how you keep the remembrance of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam alive. Then, as we understand this, we said, but more specifically, either because our religion has given special instructions or specific instructions about other groups of people, or because of its relevance to our lives, its importance to our lives, there are a few groups of people that we want to address a little bit more in a more focused way. Put a little bit more attention to those groups of people to see what it means that they belong to a community of knowledge, or how important is it that they belong to a community, this community of knowledge. And we said this can be done in different ways. One of them is to look at age groups. And we saw the importance that our religion gives to children and the youth. So children and the youth are a very important ingredient, a very important contributor to the community of knowledge. And inshallah, we said that there might be another discussion for all of this later in the series. Now we're just focusing on this angle of the community of knowledge. Another group that we intentionally spent a little bit more time on, because we said that there are perhaps misunderstandings or misconceptions around them in a lot of communities, including Islamic communities, is the role of women in the community of knowledge, and the place of women and the role of women, and the importance that Islam has given, or the freedom that Islam has given to women seeking knowledge and becoming scholars and becoming themselves sources of knowledge for others. And then slowly we headed towards the family. And we said the family as a unit needs to be addressed as a contributor, as an agent, as a player, as a stakeholder in the community of knowledge. This is a category, even though it is a collective in itself. By definition, it's a group of people together that form a family. That specifically needs to be addressed in a focused way, in a specific way, when we talk about communities of knowledge. And perhaps the only ingredient left in the who, to answer the question who, inshallah we'll get to it a little bit later once we're done with the family, is going to be what we called the intellectual. And inshallah we'll define what we mean and give a little bit more explanation around the idea of the intellectual, and why it is worth discussing and understanding the role of the intellectual in the community of knowledge. That's what's left. So inshallah today we'll see how far we get. We may be able to finish or not the topic of the family, within the role of the family, the importance of the family for the community of knowledge. What we talked about until now regarding the community of knowledge and the family specifically, we said first and foremost that we live in times and in a world that has been transformed, that is very different than the world that used to exist before. And for all the reasons that we listed, all the social, or all the ideological, or all the financial, technological, other changes, paradigmatic changes as they are called, very fundamental changes and transformations that have occurred, it is much more difficult. You are going much more against the current today than you were before when you are trying to establish a family. That should go without any doubt and should be accepted without any hesitation. That's in general. And then beyond this, we can say without any exaggeration that there are attempts, movements, ideologies that go against the idea of the family in today's world, in addition to the fact that the world has changed. And this is what we called the crisis of the family. When you put it all together, you see that there is a war against the family, or the unit that we call a family is in crisis, in that it is much more difficult to put together, much more difficult to establish. You are much more discouraged to go towards establishing a family as opposed to the past. And we looked at this from various angles. So this is simply to understand the context that brings us to say it is important to discuss this topic specifically for the role of the community of knowledge, an Islamic community of knowledge. When we say the family has to be looked at, we have to understand why. Part of the why is, regardless of whether our religion had looked at it specifically or not as an important heading, an important theme in our religion, the family, the Islamic family, just the changes that have happened in the world in general, in the world in which we live, socio-economic, financial, ideological or philosophical, other changes, should lead us to discuss, because of its relevance, because of its importance, because of how different it is from the traditional values and the societies from which traditional teachings emerged, including religious teachings. We have to look at it to see, what does it mean to talk about family in today's world? And is there a specific focus for the community of knowledge, an Islamic community of knowledge, when it comes to the role of the family? That's what brought us to discuss this idea. And we said here we're not trying to give a detailed overview of what our religion says about the family in general. And inshallah later in the series we will dedicate a theme to the family in Islam. It deserves its own theme in detail. We are not looking specifically at what Islam says about upbringing. We're not looking specifically at what Islam says about spousal selection and spousal relationships. We're not looking at the family unit in Islam. We're not doing that. All we wanted to do is to provide an overview of what is an Islamic family, to see the role of that unit, the Islamic family, for a community of knowledge. That's all we're trying to do. The claim that we're not going to go into too much more detail about, inshallah it is accepted, is that the family unit is one of the main producers of individuals who will want to willingly participate in and be a part of a community of knowledge. The community of knowledge that we've been talking about requires people who are willingly wanting to be part of it, who contribute to it, who participate in it, who believe in it. Where are these people coming from? Of course, there are individual efforts. You and I can hear about it, think about it, and say, we need to be part of this, or we need to create one if it doesn't exist. This is an individual effort. And individual efforts will start and stop with the individual. It will never be passed on to the next generation, and it will not mature, so that when you come 20 and 30 and 50 years later, you see that it is still individual efforts. Specific individuals, separate individuals coming into it or leaving it. And it stops at the level of the individual. Something has to happen so that it matures as an entity, as a community of knowledge. It matures and you go into another phase where you're no longer just putting the seeds and bringing people together and starting from scratch. Every time a new individual comes in, you're starting all the way from the earliest beginnings. No, you're building on successes and lessons learned. This is what we call the maturity. Where does this come from? The easiest way to create this is to ensure that the Islamic family is part of the Islamic community of knowledge. There's a participation in the community of knowledge from the family unit. The entire family is participating. Again, so we go back to the discussion, everybody according to their own needs and interests and wants and conditions and circumstances. Of course, we can be in situations where we say everyone in the family is participating for the same reasons and getting the same benefits. Or we say, no, every person in the family plays a slightly different role. The son plays a different role than the father. and the father plays a different role than the wife. These are different relationships. What do you need from the community of knowledge in that role? And how can you contribute back to the community of knowledge from that role that others perhaps cannot play or cannot play like you play? Right? That's the idea that we're trying to get at. The problem is that we cannot talk about the role of the family if we want to have a fulsome discussion and present something worthwhile and complete about this as an answer to this question. We cannot talk about the role of knowledge in a family without talking in general about what Islam says about the family unit. You can't separate this piece of knowledge from the rest of the family unit. The structure, the relationships, the teachings, the importance, all of that fits together. They're intertwined. And this is the reason why we said, let's at least provide a very high-level overview of the family unit in Islam. That's how we got to this point, just so that we're clear. So we're not talking about the family unit to talk about the family unit. We're just touching on highlights and important points, inshallah, in a lot of cases as refreshers, or at least as an overview that inshallah we will detail in much more nuanced way, much more detailed way, with all of the references, because we're not providing any references now, by opposition to how we have conducted the series until now, because we're simply putting in place an overview to reach another point, which is the community of knowledge and how the family contributes to it and the role it plays into it. So keeping all of this in mind, we said, so let's look at what Islam says about the family unit. And this can be done in a lot of different ways. One of the best ways to do it, and perhaps one of the easiest ways to do it, is to follow chronologically the developmental stages of a human being. As a human being is born into this world and they grow up. If we follow those stages, this is going to force us to have a discussion around what does Islam say about this, and therefore what are the parents doing, how is the family structured, and so on and so forth. So we said, first and foremost, and this is not going to be a detailed inshallah recap, just very quickly, we said that given the context that we're in, given how much discouragement we get from today's culture against the idea of get married and start a family and have children and have many children, these are all specifically things that we hear and specifically things that we find in today's culture. We go back to what our religion says. And again, we're not providing the references now. Inshallah, all of that will come in detail and will be discussed as we usually do in the series. But for now, we said in our religion, there is no doubt that there is a very strong encouragement to get married and to have children. And we even added, and to have many children. To have as many children as you can. And that the main excuse that used to be used in the past, which is poverty or lack of material resources. Children are costly. Things are not cheap. But the Holy Quran addresses this multiple times. And this was one of the reasons, by the way, why the Arabs used to kill their children at birth. The whole idea of وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ. Yes, there were very misguided beliefs that the Arabs had, specifically around the female being born and coming into their family for all sorts of reasons, related to honor and related to other things. But a part of it too, and the Holy Quran talks about it and addresses it very directly. It says, do not kill your children out of fear of poverty. We will sustain them and you. And another verse, and we will sustain you and them. So this was something happening. This fear of, I'm going to have children, and now I'm going to have more mouths to feed and more people to take care of and to sustain financially and materially. Islam rejects this. It says, you do what you got to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring them their sustenance. It will come to them. In any case. So the idea to get married, to start a family, to have children, and to have many children if possible, all of that is strongly encouraged. And if you want to add the legal aspect to it, in a lot of cases Islam says, especially about getting married, it says it could be either very strongly encouraged or becomes an obligation. If it's between getting married and falling into haram, 100% it becomes not strongly encouraged, it is an obligation, because this is the only alternative. In any case. And then we move to the next discussion about upbringing. So we started with, before Islam tells us what to do, it gives us the warnings. Many, many warnings in Islam. Make sure you do not end up with bad progeny. You do not put bad seeds into this world. You do not add more corrupt, evil, bad human beings into this world. Make sure your progeny, your descendants, your children do not become bad people. Starting with, pray for a good dhurriyyah. When does it start? When the child is born? And when the child is of age to be educated? No. Before the child is ready to be educated, before the child is born, before the child is conceived, before you even get married, Islam teaches you to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make you of those who will have good descendants. You're being wired. You're being brought up as you grow and you become more aware and more mature into this world. Quran says, and this is something we find in the stories of the Anbiya. When they had children and before they had children, we find them praying for a good progeny. When they had children, we find them praying that their progeny is going to be good. Before they have children, we find them praying, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if He gives them any progeny, that progeny is good. So there's a warning and an encouragement. The warning against going there, and the encouragement that this is what you're always focused on, even before you are in that situation. So that whatever decisions you make leading up to there, you've already been prepared. All of this was already on your mind. So that will include your spousal selection. And that will include your family choices. Because you have been praying and preparing for, and we've talked enough about action in our religion. Prayer alone without the action that goes with it, our imams say, is like someone who wants to shoot an arrow without a bow. You're not shooting with anything. The action is what allows the bow, your dua, to go forward. You have to prepare. You have to do what is required and make sure that there's dua that goes with it. Because you know that at the end, all of your actions can mean nothing if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give you the right circumstances. And all the right circumstances in the world may still not lead to what you want. It's still all ultimately in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the prayer has to be there. You have to know how you fit into the big picture. But your role is to make sure that the actions, the decisions match all of this. And so the Quran is constantly directing you. رَبَّنَا وَآتِنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. From our descendants. We want people who bring us joy and make us proud. This is قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. You were praying for this. Not when the child is born and they're 5 and 10 and 15 and 20. When you learn Quran, when you're 5 and 10, yourself, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I want a dhurriyyah and I want the dhurriyyah to be so good that it brings me genuine joy. قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. The core of my eye, as we say, the apple of my eye. This is the meaning of قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. The verse says. If we want to look at that verse, there are many verses. This can mean two things in short. You can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be a leader of those who are pious. General. But if, this is not the time to do tafsir lessons. But in tafsir, we learned that you're not supposed to look at every part of a verse in isolation. The verse is talking about what? The verse is talking about a progeny and descendants. آتنا من أزواجنا, because the dhurriyyah will not come alone. You need the right azwaj to produce the dhurriyyah. آتنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا, and our descendants, قرة أعين. Okay, so this is going to bring us joy and pride in this world and the next. And what else? And this is the key. And make us a leader of those who are pious. وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Who are the muttaqeen? It could be in general. I want to be someone who is so pious that my piety is a leadership to others, in general in the world. But most likely this is not what the verse is saying. It's saying, I am bringing into this world people who are all going to become pious. And I want to be their leader. I am at the head of those, that descendants and that progeny that will follow me. I am their imam. I put them on this track. I improved the line. No matter how good it was, I took it a step further. And I am an imam of those who have taqwa, those who have piety. وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. How? By bringing the right progeny into this world. If you understand it this way, you see to yourself, you are asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of course, and you're doing the actions that go with that dua. You're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you, this is not an individual role or an individual prayer. This is a historical role. I understand my place and my role in history. I'm coming in at this point, and this is what I'm going to do in human history. So that after me, there's a line of piety. And I am their leader. And that's why we say, Al-Quran, this is where you understand the role of Ibrahim alayhi salam. When the Quran, for instance, talks to the Muslims, all the Muslims, and all the prophets who are called Muslims in the world. And the Quran says, this was مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ Ibrahim. Now you understand Ibrahim and what he did and how he changed history. It's not just what he does. What he can do is always going to be limited. He's one person who has a beginning and an end, very limited in history. But he did enough to change enough of history that he becomes, and this is his prayer, وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. And Ibrahim emphasized, every time he prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. What about my progeny? What about my descendants? I want my descendants to be getting the same blessings I'm getting. Oh God, he didn't have descendants in the beginning. He didn't have descendants until he was very, very old. At an age where any of us would say he should consider this prayer to be completely hopeless. There's no more chances of him getting any progeny. Not him and not his wife. And that's when his progeny came. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, you're praying for a son, I'm going to give you two. And both of them are going to be prophets, not just good and not just pious. They will be prophets. And they will be the fathers of prophets. Prophethood will emerge from you. That's it. All history has changed. And this is a true definition of وَجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. He's truly an imam of muttaqeen. All the way down to our time and inshallah the end of times. All of them are descendants of one man, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Okay, so anyways, this was not part of where we wanted to go, but subhanallah, the discussion went there. All of that to say, so there's definitely a warning against bringing the bad seeds into this world. On one side, evil progeny and so on and so forth. The importance of wanting, the importance of praying for good descendants, bringing good people into this world. And then that the teaching has to start, therefore, Islamic teachings around all of this start way before the child is born. Where does it start? This is one indication. Where else? Spousal selection. Islam says you want to bring the right people into this world? Yeah. You want to make sure that you're providing the right upbringing for your children? Yes. Go a few steps back and choose the right spouse for this. And spousal selection, as we said. So this is where we find, and we're skipping all the references around this and all the nuances around all of these references. But how our religion says, for instance, first and foremost, you look for the religious traits. Especially in the case of the husband. This is something, inshallah, we'll explain a lot more. There's a very accurate set of teachings around all of this. and there are reasons for it. But both spouses have to be bringing a very clear amount of religious background into the couple. So you're choosing based on first criteria, a lot of important criteria. The first criteria, religious traits. Second criteria, moral traits. Who is this person? What does their personality look like? What is important to them? What are their values? All of this is moral traits, the moral character of this person. Then beyond that, the cultural, socio-economic, familial, other traits. Because Islam says that these are not nothing. You're not just marrying the person. You're marrying the person because the person is part of a relationship, a network of relationships, social, economic, political, other relationships. This is what you're marrying, not just an individual. That individual is connected. No one lives in a vacuum. What else is this person bringing into your life or into the world? Okay? This is not to say that it's good or bad. It's just that you have to be aware of it. Okay? And then we talked a little bit about the importance of hereditary traits, and that our religion has given a lot of importance to genetic or hereditary traits. Okay? I'm not going to repeat what we said. We said maybe some of this is new or our own personal theories or so on and so forth. We leave it for another time. But that includes the health of the person. That includes well-known indications to heredity, especially in the case of women. As we said earlier, especially in the case of men, in the case of heredity, both are mentioned, but more mentions of the woman. When choosing the woman, look at what she is bringing genetically, which tells us a lot about the Islamic theory on how genes are passed on. In any case, a lot to discuss here and maybe not the most relevant. Then, generally speaking, the general approach and methodology to upbringing in Islam. And we went through a lot of these. So a very high level. The importance that our religion gives to external beauty balanced with internal beauty. So now we're talking about the child coming into the world and how you bring them up. You teach them, you make them beautiful. There are hadith about this. تزيين الأولاد أو تزيين الصبيان, when they come into the world. And this is mustahab. Make the child beautiful. And as they grow up, the child will also become self-aware, and they start to understand that they are being made beautiful and that they do look beautiful. And at the same time, you're supposed to start teaching about inner beauty. It's not just external. We saw the importance of role models in our religion, that this is part of every step of the upbringing. Inshallah, we'll come back to it a little bit later. The importance of companions and friends and who is in the circle of this person. We saw the importance of balancing belief and action. So both have to go hand in hand together. You're teaching the child as much about the right set of beliefs and values that they carry, along with the actions that correspond to those values. It's not just actions you do because it's rituals and you follow them blindly, and it's not just belief and the actions don't follow. Right? It's all about how you feel on the inside, and what matters is only on the inside, and then the external actions don't match. In any case. In addition to that, and as we said, these are the very general principles. We're not going into the specifics yet. We'll go into a little bit more specific later. Part of it too is that the beliefs and the actions are always presented in a way that is based on reason and instinct, because it has to be convincing to the person based on their level of development and maturity and understanding. So it's presented to the child, not that you wait until they're 15. It's presented to the child when they're 3, and when they're 4, and when they're 7, and when they're 10, with explicit mentions in the hadith about those ages. What is presented? What is the child told? How much do you teach them at that level? So you are still teaching them, but you're teaching them in a way that corresponds to their level and what they can handle. And so therefore this means this applies to every stage. It always has to be convincing and appropriate and adapted to the person and their level of development. It has to be presented in the most effective and efficient way, and we talked a little bit about this. That you want it to have the greatest impact, the greatest good, while spending the least amount of energy. Right? There are different things that you can do. I can make you perform 100 raka'at to do something, or I can give you the right knowledge that goes with it, and both have their own benefits. We're not saying it's not. Except that performing 100 rak'at is not always going to be possible. And I might lose you on the way. And you might do it one day, but you won't repeat it the second day. You might do it for a week, but not a month, or a month, but not a year. Right? You have to be realistic. What can people handle at every stage of development, and so on and so forth. The importance of theological education, we'll come back to that. The importance of ritualistic education. So it is important to expose the child as early as possible to what it means to pray, what it means to fast. Doesn't mean that they're praying and fasting, but they know what it is. And with time, yes, you have to teach them. And inshallah, we'll talk a little bit about this later. The importance of self-reflection. The importance of looking at what you did and thinking about it. For yourself, think about this. Was it right or was it wrong? Could you have done it better or not? This is part of the moral education of the child, and so on and so forth. And we said the golden principle in Islam and all of this, if we're talking just about high-level overarching principles, is that you are parenting by example. It's one thing to give all the lectures and the talk and dump all the knowledge and all the information, all the ahadith and the Quran. You parent by example. You are the role model in your actions, not with your words. The words are a complement. They supplement what you're doing. They bring attention to something, but they are not how you provide the upbringing in general. Your upbringing is how you're conducting yourself day in, day out. How do you wake up? How do you talk? How do you eat? How do you walk? What do you do? All of these things are the true way of providing the upbringing. And then the rest is a complement to it. Parenting principles in general. Fairness and equity between the siblings. Inshallah, again, all of this is a recap. Fairness and equity between the siblings. And we said, if there is preference to be given in our religion, it's always towards the girls, in any case. Tailored, gradual progression. So that you follow, which means that as a parent, you understand where your children are at in their level of development and maturity, and you're giving them something that is, one, tailored to that level, but two, gradual. You're always pushing so that they keep moving up to the next level. You don't say this is enough, right? This is enough at this stage, but I keep making sure that you keep moving because we have to keep going up. There's a lot more to cover here. Okay? Initiating training. We said you have to be proactive. You are not reactive, so that when the crisis happens, now you're trying to fix it and do damage control. That would be reactive completely. When the child reaches, no, proactive, think about it before it even happens. As soon as you see readiness, you start to provide the child with what they need so that when they are confronted with, there are at least the seeds and the foundations for dealing with certain situations, right? And you proactively are the one to educate. You provide the education, you provide the upbringing before being in a situation where you're just reacting to a reality. It means you missed something. Catching what's right, recognizing and rewarding what is right, versus always only focusing on what went wrong and punishing and disciplining what went wrong. A lot more catching what is right. That the principle of firmness in tenderness. And it's not easy to find the right balance there, but this is definitely something that we find in our Islamic teachings. You are firm and merciful. Firm but tender as a parent with the children. And discipline. And of course, as I said, there is a huge amount of literature around the importance of discipline and how it is and what are its limits and when do you do it and what age, what is appropriate and so on and so forth in Islam. Again, we talked about it very quickly. And then the damage or the harms of excessive attention both ways. That you give too much attention to the child on the positive. So the child is always getting too much attention and everything that they do is exaggerated. Every little good positive thing is exaggerated into as though it is a gigantic accomplishment. Then the slightly bigger accomplishment will look like it's the end of the world and there is so much more to do. And the opposite too. When there is excessive attention, but it's only to catch everything that is wrong. Or too much suffocating attention, right? So both are harmful. So finding the right balance, oversight, overview, guidance, rigor, so on and so forth, while the child still feels that they have freedom and they have a personality and so on and so forth. Then we went into the idea of the rights of the child. And we said here we can start following truly what Islam says at every stage or step of the development of a child. So what are the rights of a child in Islam? First, we started with the right to life. The right to life is an important one, especially in today's world, where there's constant questioning of this. The right to live, one. Two, beyond this, the right to childhood. The child is recognized as a child in Islam, with everything that comes with. So starting with that the child, and we said for the right to life, and we can say it here too, if you really understand the philosophy of Islam when it comes to birth, you see that basically Islam is celebrating every birth. Every birth into this world comes with a whole set of rituals that are meant to provide a ceremony and a celebration of a new life into this world. Okay, so this is how Islam is dealing with every newborn. And then beyond this, so you want to make sure that you are providing the proper physical development to the child. So of course this is going to come with safety, feelings of safety and security and protection and health. And the discussion on health led us to the whole large discussion in Islam about breastfeeding and the feeding of a child and its importance and so on and so forth. And in a lot of ways, up to very, very recent times, Islam was certainly a lot more advanced than what we heard and what we saw culturally and even scientifically in a lot of ways. Okay, I'm not going to say too much more about this. We spoke a little bit last time about this. The importance of halal food, and the halal food for the father before conception, for the mother before conception, for the mother during the birth, for the mother during the time that she breastfeeds, and then afterwards. Everything that enters into that child is coming from all of that food, and it needs to be halal. And halal in the direct sense that you are eating halal food, right? It's not meat, that you're eating, consuming food that is halal, period, or indirectly, as in the work that you do and the business transactions and the money that you get is also from halal sources and has no haram in it. There's no haram money that is used to buy sustenance and food, even though the food might look like it's halal. The food itself is halal, but the money used to buy it is haram. And that is considered haram food because of that. So that's haram entering your body because the money that was used for it was not halal money. And in our religion, there are very, very clear teachings about this, that this has an effect on the morality of a person. Every person who consumes this food is going to be impacted by it. In any case, the right of the child to a proper intellectual development. And there's a lot that can be said here. The right of the child to a proper affective development. So emotionally, the child is being brought up with a sufficient amount of emotion and feelings and love and affection and attention and tenderness and mercy and so on and so forth. And this is something that Islam changed from before. And the examples are too many to list on how the Holy Prophet ﷺ was with children. And this was something very, very uncommon. It was something that really stood out, how the Prophet was. And when people would see him, they would ask the Holy Prophet, "You kiss?" Big grown macho men would come to the Prophet and say, "You kiss your children?" They would see him playing around with Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, or with other children. And he tells them, of course. And in one ruwayah, and there are many ruwayat, in one ruwayah he says, for instance, whoever does not show them mercy, which is a double meaning, does not show them mercy, will not be shown mercy. So it could mean children in general, which applies, because we have other ruwayat that say this. You do not show mercy to children, you will not be shown mercy by God. In general, or specifically for Imam al-Hassan al-Hussein alayhim as-salam. And a lot of the sayings of the Holy Prophet are to be understood this way. In any case, the importance of play in the development of a child, I'll come back to it inshaAllah later today. The right of childhood to purity and innocence, and we said the importance of understanding sexual education, especially in today's world, and what does it mean, and what is an Islamic way of providing this education. The importance of giving children responsibilities and duties, and to start pushing them so that you understand where they're at in their level of maturity, and it brings them up with the right habits and gives them the right skill sets in life. Teaching the children to be themselves as much as possible. So the importance of confidence, the importance of knowing that it's not always What we're looking for as parents, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, is what we called conformity. We want the child to just conform, not to stand out, to be like everyone else. But that's not always good. And that is, in fact, very harmful in situations where you need the child to have the confidence to be who they are. If you are in a minority situation, where the majority is going against your current and against your ideology and against your beliefs and against your teachings, you want the child to be confident, to be a nonconformist, to be okay with being different, being able to speak out, being able to say their mind, being able to read the situation and know how to push back or how to be themselves without causing too many issues for themselves or doing it in the right way, and so on and so forth. All of that has to be part of the upbringing. Okay, here we end with the recap and we continue where we left off. Then in Islam, there's a recognition that the child is going through development stages. Today, when you study developmental psychology, they'll tell you, with Piaget or with others, that there are people who have broken up the human development cycle into these big phases. Islam spoke about this way, way before, right? So the most popular way of presenting it is to say, there are 3 stages to the upbringing of a child in Islam. So I'll just stick with that for now, because there are many hadith around this, and Ahlul Bayt are consistent about this. That there are 3 stages made up of 7 years each. The first 7 years, the second 7 years, and the third 7 years. And they provide many different ways of presenting those stages. Different metaphors that bring our attention to different roles and different principles of upbringing that have to apply to each one of these stages. So this is all beyond the general principles that we described. So for instance, the Imam Ali alayhi salam, in one of them he says, play with them for 7 years, teach them for 7 years, and befriend them for 7 years. So when he says play with them, this is going to open the whole discussion on the importance of playing with the children, the importance of play in general. And inshallah, I'll come back to it in a second. And then after that, you are teaching them for 7 years. So of course, this is not going to be as perhaps something as pleasant to the child as the first 7 years. Because now you're in a mode where you are being taught, you're being prepared. Because at the end of that 7 years, you're around 14. And you're about to enter the last 7 years, which is you befriend them. Why? Because you can no longer really force the child after this. They're starting to have a very autonomous personality. And you don't want to break that personality, but you want to continue to stay very close as a guide and to direct them and to help them and to counsel them. And the way to do that is how? Is by befriending them, being closer to them and having a different kind of relationship to them. Today people struggle. Different schools, even within Islam. There are so many speakers, everybody is talking about how do you bring up your children. And so you see those who will focus on the best way to do it is to be the friend of your children. The best thing to do is to befriend your children. And then others will come and say, this is wrong, we do not agree with this. You can never be the friend of your child. You have to be the one who can provide the discipline. You have to be the one who can provide the rigor. And you have to be the one who is more authoritarian or authoritative, depending on how these terms are used for parenting and so on and so forth. And there's disagreement and there's no consensus about this. Imam Ali alayhi salam wrapped it up all beautifully and wisely for you. Every stage requires a different parent to be present, a different strategy of parenting. There's a time to be more authoritative and there's a time to be more befriending. There's a stage in life that requires this more and that more. Right? In any case, we'll talk about this a little bit later. But as we said, there are many other metaphors. The child is a king for 7 years, for instance. Instead of you play with them for 7 years. The child is a king for 7 years. And then the next 7, we have a hadith that say, and then the child is a slave for 7 years. And then the third one is, and then the child becomes your vizier, your advisor, the one who's always by your side, learning. You consult with them, you befriend them, you keep them close, they're always there. You give them responsibilities, you're the one in charge, but they're starting to be part of your life, your decisions, you bring them in, you have discussions, it's getting more serious in terms of what you can discuss, what you expose them to, and these are different metaphors that give you a glimpse into what Islam means when it it provides this type of breaking down of the development stages. First 7 years, second and third. Does it mean, when Islam says, this is a misconception, does it mean therefore that the first 7 years are all play? When Islam says play with them for 7 years, it's a free-for-all and the child just gets to do whatever? Because they are a king or because? No, at all. So you go through, when you're more nuanced in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, you see, for instance, they talk about during that 7 years, there is a theological education happening. The child is learning about their beliefs. The child is learning about some of the rituals in Islam. The child is learning about Quran and Quranic education, which we can't say enough about in that whole stage. That requires its own series of lectures. The importance of historical education, without telling them this is history, but to expose them to the seerah of the Holy Prophet, to the Imams, and to learn through those stories and those role models. The importance of learning values, the importance of learning manners and etiquettes. All of this is happening in that 7 years. Except that, Imam Ali says, play with them. So what does that tell you? That all of this learning is happening through a way that to the child is play. It's playful. It's entertaining. It doesn't go against their nature. The child is not expected to sit and read a book for 3 hours to learn this. They're not there yet. This is not how they learn at this stage. Okay? And this is what brings us to perhaps the need, which we don't hear about, we don't see. I haven't seen anything like this concretely. An Islamic curriculum based on these riwayat. That when you are at this age, you are presented with these types of information. Our Imams say at 3, this is what you do. Which to me is, you're providing the first lessons of Tawheed. At 3. The Imams are even say, when the child is 3 years and 7 months and 20 days, you provide the lessons of Nubuwah. The child is very young, so of course you're not going into detail and providing all the kalam controversies around the Asma and Nubuwah and no, but you are presenting some education there in a way that is compatible and adapted to the child's level. And then there is exposing the child to prayer. The Imams say you have to test the child to see their level of maturity, and if they're there, you start teaching them prayer. And even that is done in gradual layers. It's not done all at once. You are now going to learn how to perform the 5 prayers. No. And the Imam says you're going to teach them how to perform the wudu. And you teach them how to perform a sajda. That's it. That's what you want the child to do at this point. And let them go. If the child is interested, which if everything else you have done Islamically, the child will be doing all of this without you saying a word. But if you have to go out of your way to do it, this is what the Imams are saying. So then you teach them the wudu, and you start teaching them the parts of the prayer. Then you teach them the prayer. Then you add to that, the Imams say, when the child knows a little bit about from the Quran, you know this is one of the indications, which means you've been teaching them enough of Quran so that they can recite it in the prayer. Before you teach them prayer, in any case. And then you teach them about fasting, and there is ages for that. And then when they're between 7 and 14, we have clear ahadith that say you teach them the book. You teach them Quran. This is what you focus on during that time. Not that you stop teaching them everything else, but the focus and what you want them to graduate with at this stage is the Quran. Because everything else is going to be based on it. And there is everything in it. Enough of everything. Beliefs, deep understanding of religious values, some Islamic laws, all of that is in the Quran. And then they say from 14 to 21, you push on Islamic law. Today, in most cases, when you want to go study Islam, what do they start with? Fiqh. You start with Islamic law. You see where it came? If you follow the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. This is how you bring someone into Islam. This is what you present them with. This is the foundation that you give them. This is a progression that they follow. And at the end, you now give them the more detailed version of Islamic law. The details of law. You can go further into the nuances, the specificity. This is almost expertise. You've done your BA, you're done. Now you can go do a master's or a PhD in the field. But you have all your foundations, right? In any case. And all of this will allow you to establish a relationship with the child. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. All of this and these teachings from Imam Ali alayhi salam, the other narrations of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it aligns with today what is called developmental or development psychology. The psychology that follows the development stages, the psychology that recognizes that a human being has it's not just one continuous, you're not just adding one more day to the life of a human being. Something actually happens at some point, and so you're going from one stage to another. That's the idea behind developmental psychology or development psychology. Within that, there is a whole school of thought called attachment parenting or attachment parenthood within development psychology. How are you supposed to be? And especially the period between the birth of the child until they are past, the ages of 2 and 3 and 5 and 7. And that includes even the physical proximity of the child to the parents, especially the mother, but the parents. All of that is part of attachment parenthood. Because that allows you to create, and we feel, if you go through the narrations of Ahlul Bayt, all of that is in the narrations, by the way. This is going to allow you to provide the child with the blueprint for life. Everything that the child will be exposed to later in life, you've wired them for it. You allow the child to now have the proper relationship with themselves, the proper relationship with other human beings, and this is the key, and this is the Islamic component of it, that you will not find in attachment or in development psychology, the proper relationship with God. And Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam openly and explicitly talk about this. The way you parent your children, I'm not talking about the Islamic education you're giving them. The way you parent your children will determine their relationship with God. This is very profound, and inshallah, in other occasions, we'll talk a little bit more about this. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam explicitly says this. Imam al-Baqir explicitly says this. One example is, don't make promises and break them. Because to them, you are the provider. And later on, if that trust is broken with the provider, now, when the provider becomes God, because they have the abstract notions, that trust cannot be established as easily. You're removing their chances of having the right relationship with God. Imam Sadiq says this. This is not us connecting dots and coming up with our own theories. This is all very clear. This is the stage, this is the importance. That's why we say this is sacred. When we say parenting is a sacred role, it's a form of ibadah, and this was going to be my next point. When we say, Imam Ali salam says, play with the child, one way to look at it is psychology. One way to look at it is, have the mercy and have the time and give the child the attention. But at the deepest level, if Imam Ali salam is saying it, Imam Ali salam does not do what we call, mujamala, fluff and superficial things. There's none of that in Imam Ali salam. He's just truth, raw truth, absolute raw truth. So when he says play with the child, you have to have the insight to say, what does the Imam really mean? Does he really mean play with the child? So externally, 100% he says, yes, play with the child. Or as the Holy Prophet says, for instance, in his hadith, he says, with the children, become a child. Act like a child. Don't say like this is below me. And Imam Ali alayhi salam in the riwayat, he would get on all four and play with children. Why? Because to him, this is a form of ibadah. This is no different than the Imam preaching to someone else. That person requires this type of information and preaching and teaching. He requires a sermon. This person requires play. So I'm going to play. It's not about me. It's about the role that I'm performing. And both roles are sacred. Both roles are ibadah. Right? In any case, there is a hadith. So this is around attachment parenting and so on and so forth. They talk about the importance of all of this because today, and there are beautiful books that have appeared about the importance of this, that you have to be the main source of influence and guidance and direction in your children's lives. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, especially in our communities, that relationship becomes broken. And you can no longer influence your children that way. Because you didn't do what the Imam says. You lost them on the way, and let's say in stage 3, you were not their friend. as the Imam says. They were not your wazir. And in attachment parenting, it talks a lot about this. So today, this is a very relevant topic. There's a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam. He says when the child is born, for the first 7 years, to go back to the idea of the 3 sevens, the first 7 years, he says, your children are flowers. To you, they are flowers. Or something you enjoy, they're beautiful, you enjoy them, and so on and so forth. Rayhan, he says. And then he says, and your servants for 7 years. So this is in tune and aligned with many other hadith. This is where you teach them to obey, you teach them, you educate them, you give them knowledge, you give them education, you train them for the world. And then he says, then they are, and this is the key. And today you have to write full books for this. The Imam says it in 2 words. He says, so after the first 7 years and the second 7 years, he says, then they are either your friend or your foe. What have you created? Is this your friend or your foe? Today you need a whole book for this. Many, many books and many, many lectures. The Imam wrapped it up. You have to do it this way. So, as we said, the idea, the importance of this is you have to have that relationship to continue to influence them, especially in a world where you know they need more guidance than usual. Okay? And this is going to provide the blueprint for the relationship with themselves, the relationship with others in the world, and the relationship, most importantly to us, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just a raw relationship. Your relationship with Allah is through a religion. It's through the Quran. It's through Ahlul Bayt. It's through people and signs and symbols and rituals. What is the relationship of this person to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What have you created? And do you stay in the equation or not? Because in a lot of ways, in a lot of cases, the child is now going to identify religion with you. Rejecting you could also mean, or will most likely also mean, rejecting what you believe in and you stand for. Whether they should or not, in the child's mind and how they are brought up, these two go together. So the issue with the father is going to be an issue with religion. The issue with the mother is going to be an issue with religion or with God, when it shouldn't be. But that's how it is. Okay? In any case. And as we said, there are many, many ways of doing this. This would bring us in a completely different place. The importance, for instance, of teaching al-Asma al-Husna, the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His names. Why is that important? It's not to learn the words. The words have meanings. And so if you focus on some of the right meanings behind some of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are already starting to direct the child towards certain types of behavior. In any case, there's a lot more that can be said here. And then before the certain level of maturity that the child is learning through play and exploration, as we said, the Imam says to play with them. And there's a whole discussion here about understanding that this is something that will give you benefits later. This playing with them right now is going to mean that later the child has a relationship with you. If you can play with them today, then tomorrow you can be their friend. Much later when you will need to be their friend. Correct? In any case, and this is how they learn intellectually, psychologically, even moral education, and so on and so forth. And all of this, as we said, leads to ibadah. The best time to teach the child, and we see that in the hadith, the best time to teach is when they have the ability to learn, the ability to be disciplined, while they are still malleable and fluid and flexible and full of potential. And every day that goes by, you're losing some of that until it becomes a lot more solid. And this is now the new personality you're dealing with. It's not impossible. Everyone can change. Until the last breath in this world, you can still change. But the change is very different. And the approach has to be different. Correct? So there's a time, you have a window of opportunity to do the right things in the right way to maximize all of this. After the influence, it's not that Ahlul Bayt are saying there's no more influence or you stop parenting. As they said, you have to do it by or through more friendship and more indirect influence, not directive, not discipline necessarily, or the discipline has to be in a different way, and so on and so forth. And the importance that the child still feels that they can come to you, that this is not going to be something that the child has to hesitate about. Do they open up to you when there's a real problem, when it's serious, when they need the parent to intervene? They need the parent to give the advice. No one is going to give the advice the parents can give. Is the child going to open up to the parents, and will the parents know about it? At critical moments, that can go left and right, can take life in a direction or in another direction. In any case, and so this is the importance, again taken from the life of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, the importance of therefore starting to prepare the child for more mature and more abstract conversations. And in a lot of cases in today's world, if there's a mistake being done, in a lot of cases in our communities especially, is to underestimate what the child will understand and how abstract of a thinking they already have and how much they have already been exposed to and how much they've already thought about things. We think, but they're a child and this is too serious for them. It's too early to expose them to this. You're probably too late. But in any case, about the stages, a couple of words. The stages, these three stages, we have to understand, and I think I gave enough glimpses of this, but just to say it bluntly, the stages have stages within them. That's one. And two, not everybody is going to be following the same stages to the day. It's not, the day you have your 7th birthday that suddenly a switch is flicked on and then you move from this to that. This is not how it works. Some people reach what others reach, when they're 14, they reach it at 10. And the opposite. And so this all has to be taken into consideration. These are general principles. All of this, inshallah, is clear. Then the discussion brings us to the ages of hitting puberty, teen years, leading up to the stage of maturity and bulugh. The importance for the children on both sides to know the distinguishing features and therefore distinguishing expectations. This requires an education by itself, and it's not going to start on that day. The importance of supervision and guidance. The reason we have to say it here is that this is when the child is starting to now pull away more and more because they need autonomy. They need freedom because their personality is being full. In psychology, they say when the child is first born, a child psychologically does not distinguish if they are properly brought into this world and they have a connection with the mother, a healthy, proper connection with their mother. They can touch her body and so on and so forth. The child does not distinguish, the newborn does not distinguish between themselves and the mother. To that newborn, they are one. And it's only after the child starts to mature that the child starts to realize, in fact, it's not even one jump, the child starts to see that the mother is an extension of him. When the child wants to grab something, today, I know that if I want to grab something, I have to want it and my hand can reach for it. At that stage, the child thinks that the way to do this is if I cry and the mother understands, she will give me that. That's me. That's it's a tentacle of me. It's an extension of me that's getting me what I need. Every need of mine is met this way. This is just an extension of me. So initially it's one identity, and then it's an extension. And then with time the child starts to see that I'm actually a different, separate entity. I'm a different body. I'm a different entity. And I can have needs or wants that are different. This takes time and maturity and development. This doesn't happen overnight. In any case. So by the time a human being starts to develop that wanting and that need to be now a full human being with an autonomous personality is when this stage of childhood is over and the child is now hitting puberty and the teen years. This is where it's happening. And this is here, they call it the rebellion phase. And the child becomes rebellious. Why? That's one way. The child could do it in 1,000 other ways, but they focus on the rebellion because it can be more challenging for parents and so on and so forth. The child is trying to find their personality within all of this. And so there could be a lot of rejection, automatic, blind. If this is what I was told, then of course I have to do something different. Because that wasn't me. It didn't come from me. Especially if I felt that it's no longer aligned with something internally, I reject it all completely. And so this starts to show in all sorts of different ways. From the food, to how you talk, to how you dress, to how you walk, to. And a lot of people in society will, in some cases, stay in that stage for all of life, in any case. But that is a stage where, as a development, you're supposed to try to find your identity and your personality. And what are the borders and where are the limits? Where do I start and stop? What is me and what is not me? To what extent do I conform? When I conform, is it still me or am I just blindly following? Can I conform and it's still me or not? And so on and so forth. So you have to know how to deal with all of that, because there's a healthy part to this, while being able to provide supervision and guidance and parenting and so on and so forth. Inshallah, all of us, when we go back tonight, we go thank our parents for having done a good job and endured us during those stages. In any case, so this is the importance of the friendship, the companionship, that the child, even though from their world and their perspective here, the child feels like they are the most autonomous. In truth, the child is perhaps in one of the most vulnerable stages here, because they are the most impressionable. It's just that you as a parent may not, or Islam as a religion may not, agree with that source of influence. But you're perhaps the most impressionable that you will ever be in your life in that stage. Thinking, and this is the danger, thinking that you are being the most autonomous in that stage. You think now you are becoming you. So this is you deciding. And what are you deciding? To follow blindly so and so. To dress this way, to talk this way, to walk this way, to do this, to do that. Because you're impressionable. And this requires a lot of development of critical thought to be able to overcome and move on to another developmental stage. And that's why I say a lot of people stay here. In different ways, but a lot of people stay here. It's not easy to develop this critical thought. Okay? In any case. So all of this to say, the parents have to know how to do all of this, and so hence the importance of the friendship and the companion and the companionship and the respect. And this is mentioned explicitly in the ahadith, and it's also shown even in the lives of the prophets. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam asks his son, this is respect. He tells him Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kind of ordered me to kind of slaughter you. What do you think? How do you interpret this? How do you understand this? Is this not respect? We know what Ibrahim is going to do. We should have no doubt about this part. We know who Ibrahim is. But this treatment and this relationship between Ibrahim alayhi salam and his son, this is talking about this. This is a relationship that you are able to have this type of conversation with your son, right? In any case. And so hence the importance, because this develops all of that, to have sufficient one-on-one time with every child. Because every child is different and every personality is different, and the adaptation that you have to do is going to be different. So this requires one-on-one, and you don't know what comes up, what you may discover through that one-on-one. So one way or another you have to find enough of that. And then you reach maturity and you reach bulugh. Here, 2 points quickly. The first one, and I don't think that we do enough of this in general. There might be cases within families where this is done, but this has to become a general culture in our communities, where this is an important step in the life of a human being, that you have reached bulugh. And therefore, we're going to, however you want to do this, explicitly, strongly, subtly, there has to be something in the life of that child where it is clear that childhood is now behind you, that there's some sort of ceremony, some sort of celebration of the responsibility that you are now going to take on from this point on in your life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not be putting this responsibility on you if He didn't want to honor you with it. Now you have hit this level of maturity and understanding, and you can take all of this on and set the person, no longer a child now, set the person on this path in life to honor the responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now expects them to honor. You are now fully accountable, fully responsible. So go live your life while honoring this responsibility. Brings us to another discussion related to this eventually, maybe not immediately, but eventually. The next stage is therefore, or the next step is therefore, marriage. An early marriage. Early marriage, in general, 100% in our religion is encouraged. And again, I will add what I added earlier, repeat it. In certain situations and circumstances, it's not encouraged, it's obligatory. Period. 2. Here, this is the importance of 1, education, awareness, and readiness. It's not a blind automatic thing. There has to be a level of readiness for this. It has to come with the right awareness for it, that you're ready to take this on. The Holy Quran talks about this. People miss it because it's in technical verses, and the Holy Quran openly, clearly says, you get married, or you allow those among you who are ready to get married when they are ready. In fact, it says test them, because it talks about the orphans. When you have their money and they are reaching an age where they need to get married, they are starting to be biologically, chronologically in their lives, they're now at the age where they can get married. What do they do? You've been taking care of them all those years. You played the role of their father and their mother. Now they're ready. What do? The Quran says, وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى. What's وَابْتَلُوا? Challenge them, test them, examine them. In what way? See how they are able, how ready they are to be able to take on the responsibility of a household, to know how to deal with money, to make some important decisions. So the fuqaha say, for instance, this is, silly, very simple examples. This would require other discussions too. The fuqaha say, give them money and send them to the market. They need to show that they understand the value of money and how to deal with it and so on and so forth. At that time, centuries ago, this was a great test. Why not? You have to know how to deal with people, how to do transactions, how to negotiate right and wrong, so on. This is a good test. I would argue, and inshallah no one would argue with my argument, that today perhaps the tests are different and slightly more complex, given the complexity of today's world. I can't just give you $50 and send you to the market, and you come back with a bag of groceries and we say, khalas, you're ready. What does that look like today? We need research and thinking and strategizing as communities. What does that mean? What is readiness? What does readiness look like? Anyways, there is a duty upon the parents, especially the father, to assist and help for marriage of their son. And again, once someone is ready, and that's a whole discussion, and I leave it at that. I still have a lot more to go than I thought I would. So inshallah, I think we're going to have one more lecture to wrap this up. The next heading was supposed to be, and so what must be taught? What are some of the things that we want to make sure, if we had a checklist, we want to make sure that these are the things, because we took the child from before the time that they are born until now, they are a full adult and they're going to start their own life. And we explained the general principles of upbringing in Islam. So all we want to do is to start now focusing the discussion a little bit more back towards the community of knowledge. Right? And so we want to start focusing a little bit more on what are the things that are absolutely part of that curriculum to be taught at different stages, but part of that curriculum, and then the relationship between all of that and the community of knowledge. We have about 10 minutes, so let's stop here. Inshallah, we'll continue next time. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Questions, comments, concerns? Happy to take it on.
I have a question about how it says in the third 7 years, the last 7 years, focus hard on laws, jurisprudence, fiqh. For us, fiqh is mostly just reading a book of laws. You could do that in a week. So I think most people don't study fiqh that much. So what is you focused on that time?
The way that the riwayat say, they don't say fiqh, but the riwayat that I remember right now, Ahl Bayt alayhim as-salam say, teach them, and in the last 7 years, teach them al-halal wal-haram. So everything that they need to know, but to me, it's in a technical sense. Very different than I teach you morals. I can teach you what is right and wrong. This is morals. How do I do that? I don't need to teach you this is halal, this is haram, this is najasa, this is tahara, this is... I can start doing that, but I don't need to go into the details. I can simply go over a story in the Holy Quran of so and so people and how they behave, and that story alone will teach you right and wrong. And I didn't necessarily have to sit with you and tell you this is halal and this is haram. Today, the halal and haram, we would call it fiqh. So I use the word fiqh. Okay? And so the way these hadith are presented, it is as though you are teaching them to be good people. You're bringing to them, and of course I have to add another layer here. So I will just finish the thought and add the layer. In general, you have to teach them religion, but perhaps you're not teaching it in the technical way. They don't necessarily need to know the technical terms that go with everything, but you are teaching them enough that you know that their beliefs are correct, their actions are correct, a lot of their rituals are starting to fall into place, but the technical aspect of it does not necessarily need to happen at that time. This is not what matters most. So depending on, now your question, is it about people in general, or are you talking, is the question specifically about upbringing? Because I made another comment when I talked about this, and I said, today when people learn religion. I'll just add one comment and then I'll hear from you, which is, the Imams have also made it clear that depending on the context in which the child is grown, you have to adapt those teachings. As one example, and inshallah one day we'll talk more about it, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, I think he says, initiate or start by talking to, like don't wait until after, start by talking and teaching about kalam and hadith, which can basically mean teaching them theology, teaching them the right beliefs. قبل and before the murji'ah get to them. So the murji'ah were the majority of the Muslims, and they had distorted beliefs. They believed in things, inshallah one day we'll talk more about it. They believed in things that in the school of Ahl Bayt alayhi salam is considered misguidance. It's the wrong beliefs. For instance, if you believe that, regardless of what you do, right and wrong, good and bad, if you think that it's good and, generally speaking, you have a good heart, that's it, that's all that matters. All the rest of the details in religion are not really that important. That was a very big movement at some point in the lives of the Imams, for instance. And we see a lot of that in the Sufi movements today, for instance. Okay? So, the Imam is saying, teach them and talk to them and teach them theology and beliefs and so that before they hear and are exposed to those thoughts, and then the doubts start to take place in their minds, and now you have to do damage control. Teach them what is right, give them the proofs, make it convincing for them and clear for them, so that when they are exposed to those thoughts, they know right and wrong. They know where I stand towards these ideas. This is, to me, the context piece. Because perhaps you're going to be in a context where the murji'ah are not there. Does it mean that you don't teach them theology? No, the Imam is saying, in this case, at his time, those people, the communities the Imam is talking to, were surrounded by murji'ah. Today we're surrounded by a million other philosophies, and a million other ideologies, and religions, and values, and teachings. The Imam is basically telling us, so that would be the translation today, teach them all those things, where you stand with regards to all of that, before they get to them. Before it's too late, and now you have to play catch-up, and try to convince them after the fact.
I have two questions. One, sort of
somebody came home with a newborn saying he's not bad or he's on the way. So it came too late to start at the selection. So you brought up that those points of selection, birth, the selection, conception, stuff like birth, and then we go in those stages. We kind of did it another way around. Yes, but are you going to get into these things in detail, or is it just giving the overview so you can understand what you want?
Okay, so we started about the children's upbringing before the child is born, even from spousal selection. Maybe I wasn't clear, so inshallah, just to rectify, there is no hadith, and I didn't say that anyone came to Imam Sadiq, for instance, saying, I want to teach my children. I'm saying that Islam in general, if you were to ask Islam today, or at any time, if you were to ask Islam, I have this child that I want to teach them, it's not that it's too late. Islam will say, I've been giving you teachings about how to raise this child and what to do with this child before the child is born and before you were even married. Okay? I'm going to help you now, and here's what you do, and it's never too late. But if you want to be by the book and follow all of the teachings, they start even before child selection. Okay, so that's what I meant with that. Am I going to get into the details of all of these stages? Yes, inshallah, 100%. The intent is to provide the detailed version of this, which will take many, many lectures, and inshallah, this is going to be one of the main themes of the series. So after knowledge, inshallah, we have a couple of themes, and then we get to the family. And in the family theme, we go through all of this in much more detail. In a lot of ways, this is kind of the skeleton and structure of the family theme in a very, very condensed form.
I want to give a comment before the second question is, I like how you did it in the other way around, instead of your father, you select the wife, and then the children, as opposed to you look at it from the child's perspective, which is your degree, and then now you get to the point where you degree. So to a degree, there's always a process of unlearning and learning for yourself to be able to achieve that goal successfully. If you want to do it great, you do it as you as a child.
Something
like that point. My other question is more at the introduction is good. Although it's not really our main focal point, it's always stuck in my head. It is in terms of the before, let's say, it's not really accurate, but let's say the French Revolution, and then after the Olympics.
Yeah.
I see one of the main things that came out of that was to a degree was like safety. And in terms of, it was looked at in a very good light. There's some people that describe it from Christian perspectives as if it was a negative, but unknowingly painting it actually a good light. In terms of it as an ideology being a rebellious one, away from authoritarianism and injustice, and the monarchy, which is associated with it, to democracy and away from aristocracy, and so on and so forth. So I can see the why it's like it, and in the more deeper like an ideology, it's more like I would rather reign in power than serve it competitor, which is has a lot of problems in that thought, but I can't understand where that comes from. So that itself, that ideology has a lot of seeds in today's world in terms of individualism, teamism, wanting to do what you feel as opposed to what is right or wrong, what is expressive. So in a way, in a very simple way to say, that's why Islam is an answer to this, to give it just a simplified version in terms of, because in the beliefs, it answers these problems, and more specifically, share belief in terms of justice of God as opposed to an unjust God. But in a more technical way, it's it's when we're raising our children or ourselves in a society that has these restaurants in it. That's that's where the Islamic the answer comes into play, as to we're teaching them or ourselves the right mechanisms and the right beliefs and the right knowledge that equips you from not veering into that wrong ideology. As there is, let's say, it's like a 2D object. On one angle it looks right, but in an overview it's completely wrong. So that's more like I'm just giving an understanding. My question was really, we're talking about when, right now we're at a point where there's a problem, and do we go back, or do we create something new? I was just trying to get an understanding of what that back is and what that is. So kind of turning more in terms of family, but so I can get an understanding in general, because like back, let's say, in a time where it was like more of a patriarchal sense of the family, where father provides the mother cares and cares for the child, and that's how it goes on. And you hear so far away from that there are good things of it, but to go back is almost impossible because of how society has changed. So we're trying to create a new sense of what that is in terms of knowledge family. So I just want to understand what the differences are, to see like what we're reading about going back.
So it's a very good question. I don't think the answer you're looking for exists as a given answer. It's kind of like a textbook answer that can be given for this question. This is the correct answer. I don't think that exists. For 2 or 3 main reasons. So the first one, trying to find the right balance between, or striking the right balance between what stays and what has to change. What are we going back to and what are we creating new? One layer of that is that this is where the scholars have to show a lot of their knowledge and their genius and their understanding of religion and the spirit of religion. But in short, they have to show this is what part of religion is immutable and eternal and universal and unchanging, and this part of religion is the part that changes. And these are the mechanisms for change. This is how far you can take the change and not beyond. And these are the principles that you apply for that change to see if you're creating new, how do you come up with the new? So that it still matches the principles and the foundations that are immutable and unchanging. Okay, there's still a lot more work to be done in that space. And so I'm going to put it on the scholars. That's one way to answer it. And it's not about the scholars. It's to say, this is not because it's not something that can be given this type of easy answer, I would easily say today it has not been given enough thought. Okay? I can give my opinions about this, but my opinions are just my opinions. There is no consensus answer that I can give, except to say there are the big schools of thought. Clearly, I've revealed where I sit when I said what I said with all of this, because there are schools of thought that will automatically say whatever is the past is the truth, and you go back to the past and period. There's nothing to change. The past is the truth. History is the truth. The Salaf is the truth. The best of centuries is my century, as they claim the Holy Prophet said, which can no way be true, right? That was one of the most horrible centuries. Clearly a hadith to praise Bani Umayyah. Clearly, that's the reason why the hadith is put in place. Okay? In any case, to understand all of this, we need a lot more research and a lot more thinking and reflection to clearly, there's a lot of attempts out there being made, but we need a lot more to say this is the part of Islam that will always be the immutable, unchanging, universal, timeless part. And these are the principles to know how to draw the contours of that, and then which parts can change and how do they change, and do we change the thing that exists into something else, or do we create something new? What are the limits of that? That's a whole discussion. And this requires a lengthy discussion just to lay the ground and say, here are the big schools of thought. And then what are the attempts? That's one complexity before we can answer that question. The second complexity is there is clearly enough room in our religion for a family, because the question is about a family, for a family unit to find what works for them and how to adapt things to make it work for them. That it makes it very difficult to say, this is the blanket statement that should apply in every family. So the key then brings us back to education and knowledge in Islam. We have to learn enough in our religion to say, within these general, this sandbox that Islam has given us, I have freedom. I can run my family however I want. I'm encouraged to take it in a certain way or another, but that's different from saying Islam has prescribed. From the time of the Holy Prophet, from the marriage of the Holy Prophet to Khadijah, a lot of what we consider to be traditional and customary and old school thinking and should be out the window. We have to find a way that it works for you. How does it work for you as a couple? How does it work for you as a family unit? How does it work for you today? It may not work in 2 months or 2 years or 20 years. Today, in the context you're in, what do you need to do for this family unit to work as a family unit while staying true to the spirit of religion? This part means that there's always adaptation that needs to happen. And the adaptation is by family. It will be different from one family to another. And within that family, by circumstance. Your circumstances today are going to be very different than your circumstances in 10 years. Your circumstances before children are different than after. One child is different than 5. Living here is different than living in Malaysia. Right? Each one of these means that I have to look at those circumstances and say, what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. And that's it.
Yeah, the way I think it's very direct, but it was like you have in the previous where it's like you say in that world you can get away with the minimal in terms of teach them how to pray, so whenever they see you, they see the mother, and move on. And the community helps, and for 90% of the people that works, and 10% doesn't. But in terms of like today, it's almost like you and the wife. It should have always been like this, but let's say you're in the university for the child of life, right? And then you have to understand what influences there are, how society works, and where you live and where you go and whatever. So you kind of have to have a grasp of most of these things in order to help to have community, as opposed to just by yourself.
Yes.
To be able to prep that child as opposed to just a minimal surface understanding. And to be able to, that same tourism way of thinking, why it looks attractive, as opposed to a God-fearing, centrist way of life. Basically, how to make this look a lot more attractive than that, because just saying that's wrong is not going to work.
Completely correct. And inshallah, we'll touch on this. We won't answer this, but we'll touch on this the next time, because that's part of the importance of the community. And not everything can be covered by the parents, but it helps tremendously to have 2 parents who are on the same page, but not necessarily. If one of them can perform that role without the other having to perform that role, and having that awareness and that expertise and staying on top of it, so long as they're aligned and it works, that's not an issue. The issue is, if you don't, we can't say the Islamic thing is to do. But we say, if you don't, we know that you're really very significantly exposing yourself, or exposing your family, or exposing your children to very great risks that did not exist before. And so, enter at your own risk and peril, and you have to know what you're facing And whether you want to face it without being prepared, without having the education, without having an ally by your side, without having the community to back up, or to create the community if it doesn't exist, that's it. You're entering at your own risk, right? We're not saying Islam says you absolutely have to become an expert, but in today's world, and to be honest with you, this is the theme of the entire first theme, the knowledge and reason, and why we started with it. We can no longer afford to live in this world and not be backing ourselves up with the power that comes from this type of knowledge and education and understanding of how the world functions today, and therefore strategizing how we have to deal with it as individuals, as families, as communities. Let's pray. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.